I'm here with John Anderson at CNU 31 in Charlotte. John, I've known you a couple of years. Do we want to admit?
I think you came. We knew each other off the original CNU listserv. And
Yes, the beauty of the listservs. Yeah.
Yeah, and then you came out to.
I think
Charrette.
Well, I did come to a show. Did I meet you maybe at Milwaukee CNU? I think that was the first Congress I went to. CNU 7, I think.
Yeah, well, you drug me down to do a bunch of stuff for the MPO.
That's right, I did for Mark. Yeah.
I've never spoken that many times in a city that generated zero work.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, oh yeah, you're a thought leader.
We were just way too early. Yeah. But yeah, late 90s.
Yeah.
And then we first, I think, worked together on the Truckee charrette in 99 in Truckee, California. That was a lot of fun.
And then the one in Lee Summit, that was fantastic.
Longview, 2001. Yeah.
Oh, by the way, the catering for that charrette.
Yeah.
For the listeners that are doing charrettes, if you're doing more than a 3 or 4 day charrette, and it's you get this death march. By day 3, you need to be bringing in chicken soup. It's like, I feel comforted and appreciated. And there's a massage chair. Damn.
Yeah. We always tried to mix it up and really make sure people were taken care of on our charrettes because it's a grind. Many, many hours. So anyway, John, let's talk a little bit about who you are. If anybody who's familiar with the new urbanism world has probably heard you speak, has probably seen your name. You've now that it's 2023, you're this like really famous guy that everybody knows and talks to.
No, I think the term you're looking for is infamous.
Oh, well, there's that too.
Yeah.
So I know that you started as a young person in Minnesota, grew up in Duluth.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I think you told me at one time you were a high school dropout originally.
Yeah. Well, I didn't so much drop out as I just never got around to going back after Christmas vacation because I got more hours at the kitchen I was working at, the restaurant I was working at.
Yeah.
And it was like, oh yeah, I'll go back next week. And then after a while, the registration for the next semester was coming up, and they wouldn't let me take any more shop classes. Mm-hmm. They needed me to go to English and algebra and stuff, where I had incompletes or Fs. So if I can't take any shop classes, what is the point?
Yeah. Yeah.
So if you drop out of high school in northern Minnesota, you work in places with your peers.
Yeah.
Which include people recently released from jail or prison, people aging out of foster. So that was kitchens, construction sites, and scrapyard, which is way too shady even for me. So. Mm-hmm. And I realized that construction doesn't require you to work as relentlessly hard as being in the restaurant business. Mm-hmm. So kind of by default, I slid toward that.
Yeah. And you were, was it electrician is what you gravitated towards?
Yeah. Well, I started doing drywall and painting, and because I'd done renovations with my dad in the houses we lived in. So I knew my way around that, and I kind of gravitated to carpentry because that's kind of a macho, let's build cool stuff thing. Mm-hmm. And then I was doing electrical work, and a guy I knew from around the way said he could get me into the electrical union in New York, which is what he was. I didn't understand at the time that you need to kick back half of your salary for the first year. But so at 18, I went out. We lived in a 6-story walk up on the 6th floor in what used to be called Hell's Kitchen. Mm-hmm. So I was in New York, in Manhattan and Brooklyn. We're doing renovations of brownstones where your task at the beginning of the day is to sweep the syringes off the stoop. Mm-hmm. And you got to figure out if this is a Dominican neighborhood or a Puerto Rican neighborhood so you can hire the right guys.
Yeah. Was there a union trade for sweeping syringes?
There should have been. I mean, you should get paid for that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But I was able to... I went through the program and got my journeyman's, and then about 6 months later, I fell off a scaffold and shattered my shoulder. And as part of rehab, I used to be left-handed, but that was the side I fell on. And as part of my rehab, they put me into an architect's office, ostensibly to do electrical design, which is another word for you will be everyone's red line drafting bitch for all they ever put people in the office. And this is all before CAD. So it's like pencil and Mylar and hand lettering.
Yeah.
Because they were too cheap to get a Croy machine. So I had to learn how to letter with my right hand. And finally, when I get my arm out of the apparatus, it's like I couldn't write or draw with my left hand anymore. So I was there for like 2 years, and most of what I was doing, they had a picture in their minds about, what was an appropriate task for me. So if we need measured drawings of a shitty building full of rat shit, send John. Oh, we're going to have a big knockdown, drag out argument with an Italian contractor in Queens. Send John. Those are his people. And so, after a couple of years of that, and there was like no illusion I would become an architect. You'd have to finish high school and go to college.
Right. I mean, even then there was still actually a path back then.
Yeah.
It was a much easier path back then than there is now.
Yeah. You could put in time in the trade and document it, and you could qualify to take the test.
Right.
And after a while, it was a diminishing number of states that would allow that. And now it's like I was in California, and I was like tallying up like how many years of experience I had, and maybe I would test for license. And while I was putting together my documentation, they changed it so that, yes, 8 years experience, no problem, you take the test. You can reach back as far as 6 months from today, reach back 6 months, it's like, and then start your 8 years of experience. At which point, David Kim told me that, look, the last thing you should do, John, is put yourself in a position where your argument with the client allows you to be sued, and so no, you can always find grown-ups and architects that will be happy to work with you. Yeah. So so I took that advice to heart, and also just that I felt so, when you sort of see an action and assert what you must think must be the motivation. I figured that the AIA in California was personally out to get me because you could not have saddled me with so much frustration and disappointment on accident, right? It's like, if you ask those guys, they're like, no, we do that all the time. It's not personal. You're not that special, John.
But ultimately, it wasn't that hard to find young, naive architects from Kansas City to come to California
and
have them
work with
you.
California. So. It's like, we've got these things all designed, but we need working drawings.
Yeah. So you're in New York. At some point, you go back to Minnesota, or were there other steps?
Well, I go from the architect's office to, I got a gig with a local contractor as a superintendent, and that turned into estimating, project management. And then I didn't, if you always want to work on a bigger project, you jump from company to company to do that. You chase the projects. Yeah. So I did that for quite a while, to the point where we were now, I was working with like a family development company doing, infill townhouses for volunteer ambulance corps, in Westchester, or medical office condos in Orange County. Everything was opportunistic. They were just bouncing around all over the place. And then one fateful day, a Tuesday in 1987, company owner asked me to come in early and explain to me what a margin call was and why I should be concerned. And he was in very heavily on margin. It turns out he had a cocaine issue too. Should have seen that coming. And so there was a margin call, and he would have to come up with a significant amount of money. His family bailed him out with the understanding that we liquidate the company, sell all the projects. And so after that was over, a headhunter found me a gig in Reno, and we had our first child at that point, and realized we had no support system, and I went back to Minnesota. And
it seems like a familiar story.
Yeah.
We'll talk about that another time.
Well, the Savannah's great when you're single trying to live life.
Yeah.
So I go back to Minnesota. Went to work at the Mall of America for what's now the Simon Properties Group, so REIT. But at that time, it was a family-run development outfit. And this was on the site of the old Metropolitan Stadium. It was a public-private partnership with the city of Bloomington. and the the developers from Edmonton, 555 Corp, um, went to Teachers Insurance and said, Teachers Pension Fund said, we want to do this thing with amusement park and more coastline than the Atlantic Pacific, and the Flying Gramasian brothers. And the people at Teachers says, well, this is great, but you need to get like a real mall developer. And we did a lot of work with Simon. Why don't you guys have a shotgun marriage? And so they brought in Simon, and the folks at Simon, they went through every legitimate vice president, and they all took a pass. No one wanted this project in Siberia. I mean, Minnesota. And so there was a guy recently elevated, who took it as a career opportunity. What he did was he said, this is a highly siloed, specialized arrangement where people kind of measured their role in the organization by the number of people they supervised. Mm-hmm. So Joe, our rabbi in the effort, says, I need to have somebody from every department so we can have an integrated team, and we're going to locate them on the site in Minnesota, and we're going to make this happen. Mm-hmm. And they said, no, these are my people. It's like, well, if we have to do this, I know, give them Murphy, that'll fix them. So they had this collection of black sheep, maverick, troublemaker types who were thrilled to get out of their silo and work on a team. And the rest of us, they recruited from the minor leagues. And we were thrilled because this is like a big grown-up project. Biggest thing ever.
No doubt. Yeah.
And there's some things that don't get better when they get bigger. And shopping malls fall into that category. Yeah. And so I had that gig. We moved to Minnesota. We have another kid. We live on the west side in a Sears Roebuck house. Mm-hmm. And every day I would get in my little skateboard of a car and drive through from the streetcar expansion to St. Paul through every successive generation of American development till I get to the intersection of two freeways by the airport where we're building a huge mall. Yeah. And every night I would reverse the process. And there was such cognitive dissonance. I was like, I was so miserable on that car trip every day that when I finally read Geography of Nowhere, I was like, this guy knows exactly my experiences. He proposes no solutions, but boy, does he have it on point.
When you're driving back at night and driving back in the reverse, did you like feel your blood pressure dropping as you get closer and closer?
Yeah. No, well, actually, it's like in the spring in Minnesota, you have the mountain of snow and dirt that's in one corner of the parking lot. Yeah. So I would pull in, and there was always parking space over there. So I'd sit there and I'd be looking at the Flash Cube Black and Beach building that we were occupying. And, it's like, deep breaths. Okay, we're going to go in there and listen to people scream at us. Yeah. And so I was there for 4 years because we had a incentive thing you got to get there to grand opening and then you get your package. Mm-hmm. And in retrospect, I learned everything I needed to learn about building, hypertrophic malls in the first 2 years. Mm-hmm. So, but that was a time when health insurance was, a big thing. Yeah. So we get that open, and during that time I'm on the board of the neighborhood CDC in my neighborhood. So I'm living. I got one foot on the dock and the other on the boat, and my life is a series of groin pulls at that point. And so finally I get done and I hang out a shingle and start doing contract project management. Okay. And I got a nice, I'm one of 7 project managers from the mall. So I got a big muscular resume. Right. And people hate me because I worked at Mall of America, so in Minneapolis, you can imagine. I'm killing off other malls. Yeah. Yeah. So I'm a terrible person. But I probably know something because we got that thing open under budget and had a schedule. So I'm doing that. And one of my clients was Michael Lander, who was doing infill townhouses and the like. Yeah. And so he crashes the second CNU in Los Angeles. And he comes back super excited, and he takes me out for coffee. And it's like, John, we're gonna have a town planning company because I met this guy from TPC and he's moving back to Minneapolis and you're a builder, I'm a developer, he's a town planner, it'd be amazing. I'm like, well, what's a town planning company?
Yeah.
It's like, well,
what is town planning?
Yeah.
Exactly.
So he gives me the Peter Katz book and, Geography of Nowhere. And it's like, this looks really dangerous. I don't know if I can do this. And so we bring in a project and it performs well. And it's kind of a bonus or a treat. We go down to the technique of town planning, 3 days with Andreas.
At Seaside?
At Seaside.
Yeah, sure. Uh-huh.
Where I spent 3 days arguing with Andreas. And his response was just artful. It's like, well, let me appoint you to 3 committees of the CNU. And I'm like, what's the CNU? Oh, we're meeting in Charleston next month. You must come. I was like, okay. So I go to Charleston with our contingent from the Twin Cities, and we stay, in an amazing Charleston single, in the servants' quarters in the back. We're walking around the peninsula, and then 300 amazing people. Yeah. And but at the same time, I had just been to Laguna West, which was a Kelthar project that had gone sideways in the recession. And it was pretty awful. And it's in the New Urbanism book. Yeah. Yeah. And, I think that they had to work really hard to find something sympathetic to photograph. Yeah. Because they had like models and stuff in there. So I was thinking, Seaside was amazing. The Laguna West at the other end of the spectrum, it's huge. They did infrastructure for 1,000 homes. So there's like utility stuff stubbed up with taco wrappers blowing up against it. And it was tumbleweeds. So I was really, it's like, I don't know about this. And then the guys from Celebration were there. It was like, Disney is doing this? I definitely don't want to do this. And then the opening keynote was Henry Cisneros, the Secretary of HUD, who proceeds to show us a slideshow of raised ranch houses in the South Bronx. And I'm like, screw this. This is not for me. No, sir. And he got a standing ovation from these people, I think just because he was the HUD secretary. Yeah. And then there was a debate in the City Hall chambers with like the Windsor chairs and the tilt desks and the portraits of dead white guys 3 high on the wall. And Kunstler was debating with Ray Gendros, Calthorpe, and Ben Solomon. And he was making what I thought was a very convincing argument why the CNU should not get into bed with HUD for Hope 6. That turned out well, but it's like, it looked very like this was going to tilt to this organization of people tied in with Disney and Laguna West, and now they're going to go with HUD. I think I'll go back to doing infill in Minneapolis. And then I heard Leon Creer, and it's like my brain melted. It's like I got to do this for the rest of my life. Like these cartoons are like the scribblings of a madman, but it somehow really spoke to me. So so after that we put together a plan book from in and around the New Urbanism stuff, stock plans that could work.
Yeah,
alleys.
I still have those. Those you 2 or 3 of them that you did.
There were 3 of them.
There were 3. That's
yeah. Apparently $800 on Amazon now, completely out of print.
Really?
Yeah.
Maybe I should try to go on eBay and try to list mine.
Well, I've only got 3. I used to have boxes of them, but I just have 3. But that let me. At that time, I got a lot of work that was like table scraps from DPZ. It's like 12 acres in Charlotte. It's for a builder. Have him call John. Those are his people. Yeah. We can't be bothered. Yeah. It's not 300 acres. No. Yeah. So I did a bunch of that, and it was really frustrating because we get it entitled, and the client would flip it to a builder who would proceed to, now the houses are slab on grade, utilities in the front yard, the street that we drew and got accepted, the engineers fixed it so it would be properly overly wide, and the alleys are gold plated. And so it felt like my clients we would work together to get it to the 2-yard line, and then they'd head for the showers. And I'd seen places like New Point and, Kentlands. Right. And it's like, I know we could do this. And our projects in Minneapolis with Michael Lander were pretty darn nice. So at that point, also I've got depression. So, I'd be in Minnesota in the winter, and then I would go to Austin or Florida or the Carolinas and have sunshine and feel great.
Yeah.
And go home to the embrace of my family and feel like putting a gun to my head.
Where it's gray for 6 months straight.
God, it's awful.
Yeah.
Well, for me, it was particularly awful.
Yeah.
And so we decided we're going to move someplace with sunshine and where we have a shot at building again. And so I looked at my client list at that point, interviewed a bunch of different places, but we decided to go out to Northern California where I had a couple of clients. Mm-hmm. So we went to Chico, which kind of reminded me of Duluth. Mm-hmm. Kind of a peripheral city with a second-rate university. Now, they didn't have a great hockey team like University of Minnesota Duluth did, who beat Notre Dame, damn it.
Well, they're usually up there in like the Frozen Four. In that world,
they do well.
Yeah.
In Chico, they had a really good D1 baseball team.
Oh, okay.
So, it was kind of a blue dot in a red county, mm-hmm. kind of like Duluth. Mm-hmm. But also, it was like Duluth, we had no illusion we were ever going to become the Paris of the prairies.
Right.
It was a pretty gritty, working class, working port. And we didn't feel like we had a lot in common with people that refer to themselves as Minneapolitans. But I digress. So we go to Chico, worked with Tom Giovanni, and we were simpatico and kind of had opposite strengths and weaknesses.
Yeah, that was the first time that you and I actually got a chance to work together, working at Truckee and then working in Chico when you started conceiving Dough Mill. Yeah, and so we took over an existing PUD that was fallow that the bank had bought, and we bought that, mm-hmm. and then just rejiggered the PUD. We had like one planning commission meeting, and it was done. Yeah. So it was like I'd heard all these stories about how hard it is to get things entitled in California, and I thought, well, not if you're us. Yeah. That changed. Yeah. But so we did the plan. We wrangled with the engineers and mm-hmm. The utility companies and the parks department that needs bloated, huge parks for efficient grass mowing. Yeah. All that stuff. And we pushed really hard not to, the city kept talking about how we should have the HOA take care of that. Yeah. And we decided that we wanted to have the same HOA as the two best neighborhoods adjacent to the university, where where the mayor and the bank presidents live, mm-hmm. which is no HOA. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Public street, public alley. Yeah. And we held it together and were able to deliver that. And we did a couple of other infill projects with the idea of scaling up, because we were working on the Marion Park project, which we did that charrette in 2003. Mm-hmm. You were there for that too. I was not at Marion Park. It was in my brain. Yeah. I know it was a weird thing. It was one of those that I always regretted not being there, because you had Leon Creer for that. Yeah. I remember he kicked my ass for 5 days straight. Oh, I bet he did. Yeah. Yeah. But I mean, you had invited me, but I actually had a conflict with another project at the exact same time, if I remember right, and I'd already committed to it. So we 200-acre master plan. There was a site that was purchased to replace the downtown hospital, but mm-hmm. economics of healthcare changed, so we were going to be able to buy it from them. And it was 3 years to get full entitlements and support of the local environmental community. And so we had about 30% of the capital stack was local bank debt. Mm-hmm. Everything else was equity. And in 2008, the bank called all their development loans on the basis that if you remember at that time, the term mark to market, mm-hmm. which we're about to see for mm-hmm. office buildings now. Mm-hmm. It's like, well, this 200 acres, if you had to sell it at a bulk discount in 90 days, what's that worth? Yeah. We lent you way more money than that. Mm-hmm. You need to repay your loan. And so it was a cash call. I couldn't do it. So I got diluted out. Mm-hmm. And then the New Urban Builders, the company we had built, shrunk down from 50 people, because we had so many carpenters and the like, mm-hmm. In-house, to 3. And David Kim and I were not in the 3. Mm-hmm.
And we managed to, at the same time you miraculously was able to do design work in Savannah and not have to ever become a bartender.
Although I seriously considered it for a while.
Yeah. Well, we ended up doing a bunch of work, a lot of times for our former competitors. And that was kind of a dark night of the soul, because the we understood more about development and engineering and utilities and marketing than our new clients did. They were hiring us for a design mojo in a very superficial way. So, but it paid the bills, and we learned very quickly what we didn't want to do. We don't do that anymore. And then we started looking at, if there is no construction loan to be had, what could, you'd have to build with cash, like hard money or equity from your friend, the dentist, or the guy who owns the Ford dealership. What could we build with cash, fairly modest, and then refinance it with a 1 to 4 unit agency mortgage, FHA, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac. And at that time, you could do up to 20% non-residential. You could do 1 to 4 units and 20% non-residential. And so we, at 19.6%, office, and we got to that point by making the bike storage room slightly larger, and we called it the form follows. We're like reverse engineering. What can you do given the resources that are out there? We called it the form follows finance fourplex, or the 4F.
Right.
Now, I wanted to call it the form follows the smoking crater of financial death, fourplex. David thought that form follows finance fourplex was alliterative and shorter. That would be better.
Well, David's a little more diplomatic than
David's an infinitely better person than I am. I am so much, but I'm so fortunate to have him, in my head, like on my shoulder, and Eleanor, my wife, on the other shoulder. I mean, I have not murdered anyone since I started. But I certainly understand the urge.
Yeah.
So we started doing that, and we sent it out like, let's open source this, reskin it for your local thing. Here's the pro forma. Because we've gotten into a habit of, if you're going to design something at a very early stage, you need to see if the numbers are going to work and adjust the design accordingly. You do it in an iterative way. And that's how we'd operated in New Urban Builders. So it's like, what, you don't do that? You don't run your numbers? If your design guy's working for a developer, you better. So we sent that out. A couple of people took it up and wanted to build it. We did a few projects where we were working, we would work on spec, early conceptual design, but once financing was in place, we would get our full fee plus, and then we get a piece of equity. And that worked pretty well. We had projects in Albuquerque that way. But we evolved a situation where we tried really hard not to take on any design or planning work if we weren't also doing the pro forma, because we'd had the experience kind of in the immediate 2009. The developer farms out his pro forma to a finance guy, and it's usually a guy. And so the numbers guy says, this doesn't work. Please redesign it. Basically, guess again, for the same fee. It's like, how will we know? It's like, turns out the finance guy can't read drawings. So there's no collaboration. Basically in a fit of pique, I declared that we would never do another design project if we weren't also doing the pro forma. And it occurred to our client at that time that, well, really, what do you guys charge for the pro forma? And the light bulb went on. It's like, we can charge for the pro. This is awesome. So if we did a project at 8 or 9% of budgeted hard costs on the architecture side, planning side, we could add another 2 points for doing the pro forma. But since you're doing it at the same time, you're in the room for the discussion about, hey, I think we got a problem, as opposed to, hey, I showed this to my contractor, and here are his value engineering notes that you need to incorporate. You want to create a scar where we ripped something out of the front of this building, So that really evolved our practice. And so we end up as kind of developer, designer stuff. And we kind of took the show on the road with CNU about, look, we should start looking at reducing the scale of what we're building.
Mm-hmm.
But we saw so many of our friends' firms. There was an outfit in Kansas City that totally shut down. The guy moved to Savannah, But we saw a lot of folks going to the principals in the firm would spend down their savings to keep people on because they needed their crew because they could maybe get that one project. Yeah. And then they didn't get the one project. And then they laid off their people who were hugely pissed off and didn't appreciate the fact that they spent their life savings to keep them on. It's like, well, we're doing great
Not
work.
just the life savings, but like digging into ever deeper lines of credit.
Yeah. So at that point, I became really obsessed with how screwed up the architecture and planning business model is, where you're getting paid a fee to basically write, great sheet music that will be performed in front of the masses. This is going to be an amazing place. I can see it right now. We're following all these principles. If we can build it halfway as good as what we have on paper, this will be awesome. Yeah. And we will not own any buildings in this awesome place.
And you're getting paid that fee, which is really in the whole scheme of a project, a pretty small fee, because you're getting paid cash out of pocket at the front end by a developer, which is exactly the money they don't really want to spend at the worst possible time. Yep. And then lo and behold, on the back end, you get like a realtor who,
made more money than you did.
Makes 6 times the money you did for, for taking phone calls. If you created the project right, they're just answering the phone.
Right. And
not to denigrate realtors.
They're kind of like they serve a useful purpose. They're kind of like the guy that works for the county, has a pickup truck with a shovel in the back who picks up roadkill. I mean, that's an important function. Somebody's got to do that. Yeah. Yeah. I don't want to do that. Yeah. But particularly like residential realtors who deal with people's completely unrealistic expectations and somehow make a living. That would kill me. Yeah. Wait, I do that. So we're looking at the business model and thinking, we are adding a tremendous amount of value, and there's a lot of resentment between folks on the design side and the developers who don't. From the point of view of the designer, if you would just get with the program and do what I say, even though I'm completely oblivious to what the math is, right? Then things will be great because look at Kent Lutz. Mm-hmm. So I kind of went on a smart-ass crusade of trying to, because I spent a lot of time trying to convert developers to build urbanism. Yeah, which is a fool's errand. Yeah,
we all did a lot of that.
Well, I mean, they learned their lessons the hard way, like on the brink of bankruptcy. So what they learned was if you depart from the conventions, bad things happen. Yeah. So even if they want to do it, the first time there's a speed bump, they want to reach for what they know. Right. So there's a parallel situation where trying to convert architects and urban designers and planners into people who own buildings. A lot of architects are allergic to the idea that they should know anything about money. Mm-hmm. I don't know if it's something that happens, it gets beat out of you in studio or that if you...
It's hard to describe, but it's
almost... If you understand money, that's compromise your great art.
Yeah, well, I think that's a big part of it. Yeah. Actually, I mean, in all seriousness, I think that is part of it. And it's, it's like that's a dirty thing that we don't really need to concern ourselves with.
Well, to my mind, to my simple recovering electrician's mind, you're very comfortable as urbanists becoming amateur, stormwater people and parking experts. Mm-hmm. And you can read a traffic study, and something about you be a generalist. Yeah. But the finance stuff is just a bridge too far. Yeah. Right. All this other stuff is technical. This finance thing is will corrode your soul. You can't do that.
Well, and I think there's something about money. People get scared. People don't like to talk about money, and they get scared and easily intimidated, and you get embarrassed by asking, well, shit, I don't have any money. maybe I don't really know anybody who's got money, and how the hell do I ever like learn about that?
In the incremental development sessions, some of the more hackneyed jokes, it's like, okay, how many people in the room want to be developers, but they feel like they don't have enough money yet?
Mm-hmm.
Half the room, their hands go up. It's like, well, yeah. I think it's adorable that you think developers use their own money.
Yeah.
They use some of their own money to pull the deal together, but then that's like raw material to make the project happen.
Right.
It's like you don't have enough money to start it. Do you have enough plywood stacked up in your backyard to be able to build a building?
Mm-hmm.
No. You get plywood when you need it as material to build the project.
Yeah.
So the struggle of like how do we crack this problem? How do we get to a point where the people that are involved on the front end don't end up designing something that can't be built, and just all of these kind of all the static on the line on what should be a cohesive, collaborative environment.
Yeah,
we can't communicate well because we come from these different tribes. So that was around the time that we had the conversation about, okay, forget about trying to convert existing developers.
Right.
Kevin Klinkenberg says we should just create 1,000 new developers.
Mm-hmm.
And at the time, I thought that was hubris. I was thinking 10 would be good. 1,000. Okay, that's a stretch goal.
I have been known to have some hubris from time to time. Not very often. Yeah. Every once in a while,
it leaks out. Will beat that right out of you.
Oh God, yeah.
Yeah. You're the idiot in the household for a long time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So, well, what would it take to make new developers? And so the CNU in Buffalo, I got it put on the program that 8 in the morning, the day after the dance party. 8 in the morning on Saturday morning, we would have the first annual, talk about hubris, the first annual rookie developers breakfast. And we were going to meet at this coffee shop, and 50 people showed up. And we had conversations, and we talked about fourplexes and maybe we could own buildings. And a lot of younger folks, a lot of women. And it was like, I felt like, being struck by lightning.
Yeah.
But we took down an email list and stuff, but I lost that. So for the next year, about 2 or 3 months, my daughter put me on Facebook, right? And explained to me why social media was useful. I was highly skeptical. Now I live on Facebook, but so for the following year in Dallas, I had put together this Facebook group about like small developer builders or something. And I proceeded to dump everyone I knew into that group, and they could opt out if they wanted to.
Yeah.
But look, we got 200 members. Right? So kind of like a cat, a 12-pound cat puffing up before a fight.
Yeah.
So then we had the second annual Rookie Developers Breakfast, like get coffee and go stand in the public park. And people joined the Facebook group, and we started doing like Zoom or online classes, on Saturday mornings. And it was pretty quickly that people were saying, we need to, and the first group was all women. So we started talking about, we should get together and have like an actual face-to-face training session.
Yeah.
And so Ellen M. Jones and a couple of people from the Atlanta CNU chapter said, well, we can do it in Atlanta. When can we do it? Because people can get there fairly easily. We'll do it in October, and it'll give us time, right? And then the discussion goes a little further, and people said, October, screw that. We need one now. So 3 weeks later, we were doing the first, what became incremental development workshop in a event center that was formerly an auto body shop in Duncanville, Texas in August. And the air conditioning system disappointed us mightily. And we toured Monty's projects, and, it was kind of a death by PowerPoint for 3 days. And we learned a lot since then about hands-on exercises and the like. And then between that one and October, I did, I think, 3 or 4 in New England. So by the time we got to October, we'd recruited some more speakers or faculty, and it came off as pretty polished. You know, my dad's got a barn that's put on a show. Yeah, we opened for Herman's Hermits, you know? And people liked our stuff. And then we formed a nonprofit. Jim Kumi came on, came off of Strong Towns, and we got going. We got a board together, did a nonprofit thing, and ran around the country, Johnny Appleseeding this stuff. And it's been the most satisfying piece of my professional life because, I'm good at kind of analyzing and strategizing, and it looks like what you need to do is focus on these more basic things, smaller projects, do the recipe for yourself before you cook for 40 people.
Yeah.
But then COVID rolls in, the InkDev training goes virtual, and compared to that visceral, you're getting good feedback, you see the light bulb go on, you're at someone's elbow with a site plan. It just seemed like just profoundly disappointing because I'm looking for that. And this was like decaf.
Yeah.
So I'm reminded I wanted a real cup of coffee. So we started doing in-person, 2022 in-person training in Atlanta, about 15 people, local cohort. And during that time, the project that Eleanor had initiated was the purchase of a 2-acre former Volkswagen site. The building had been vacant for 11 years. The roof had failed. We ended up pulling 37 dumpsters of moldy used furniture out of there. But this is just classic do as I say, not as I do.
Yeah. Because at this point, you're living in East Point, and you're trying to do this project.
We moved to East Point on purpose. I was working with David Kim and Bruce Toller and Will Bergen. Tommy Pacello had brought us to Memphis, and we were working on an infill project with Tommy before he passed. So we're really busy, and we're doing good work. And so Eleanor's taken on this project because it's 2 blocks from our house. We see it every time we go to the hardware store. Yeah. And we get it under contract, and we're moving forward with it. But it was too prominent, and there was like too much notoriety around it in a city where we had not really built a foundation of trust. And what we tell other people was start small, do an ADU, do a house hack, renovate a gas station, and build as of right. Don't worry about any entitlements or overlays or doing that, urban design planner mojo. Because you need to find out like the difference between what the municipality has like in the brochure versus in real life on the street. So and what we did not understand at the time was the mayor had characterized that we were white gentrifiers from out of town, actually from Portland. So we're like the gentrifiers from Central Casting, and we should be opposed at every turn, but don't put anything in writing. We only found that out 3 years later when the property went back to the bank, back to the lender, and was foreclosed and auctioned. So it was a really painful lesson. We were really invested in the community and the neighborhood, but we were oblivious to how afraid they had no plan, but they were, living in the threat of the glacier redevelopment coming from the northern border of the city with Atlanta getting their way. And it's not for me as a doughy white male to say, you really shouldn't feel that way. It's only been 400 years. Aren't you over that yet? So it's a really big, hairy problem. And I think that as new urbanists, it's easy for us to kind of believe our own press that, we are doing important and valuable things. And people, if people don't outright welcome us, they shouldn't give us a lot of opposition because we're going to make a great place, And I think we need to meet people where they are and develop the sort of communication necessary to sort out conflict. We need to. This stuff only is going to happen at the pace that we build trust.
Yeah. Yep.
And
and there's no immediate utopian fix to any of it.
Well,
I mean, Stephanos always talks about it's, it took 100 years to create the dysfunction that we have in our cities, and
we're not going to unwind it in 5.
No.
Yeah. Well, I think also because we like to think that we're really pragmatic, but we have such an idealistic streak.
Oh yeah, very strong.
And it creates a lot of blind spots.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that we found doing Del Mill was if you get too far out ahead talking about creating utopia,
mm-hmm.
and you only deliver 72% utopia, people want to talk to you about the 28% they didn't get. If you do a pretty good job and deliver 28% utopia, people are thrilled.
Yeah.
You're a hero because you kind of under-promised and over-delivered.
Yeah.
And so setting and maintaining realistic expectations and engaging other people so that, you're not the heroic white savior. I made so many mistakes over the last 3 years. Looking back, I think the only salvage value that we're going to have from that project is going to be to take a really sober and transparent look at what the lessons learned were.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that at this point, we're probably looking to move out of town because it would be hard to go to the hardware store and see that site. Yeah. Now bought by a couple of doctors who have no idea what they're doing.
Uh-huh.
A couple of white doctors, so this will be
interesting.
It'll be bad. So Eleanor and I are looking at the smaller cities outside the perimeter freeway.
Mm-hmm.
And these are typically the demographic mix is 50-50, 60-40, and white folks and black folks are doing business together.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's probably a better environment. East Point is an 80% black town with black elected leadership and black senior staff. And so if you have the lens of trying to defend your town from the gentrifiers, the things that are going to, you'll see through that lens, you could confirm that, that must be who we are. And all the work with IncDev and the fact that we were mentoring, small black developers to work in the project, that was seen as like the most cynical sort of tokenism.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like I was really bitter, feeling like really like unfairly misunderstood.
Mm-hmm.
That's my problem. I'll get over it. Let's find something constructive we can do.
Right.
As a right, at a small scale.
There you go.
Building trust.
Yeah.
Not asking for any rezoning or any of that.
Macon's a pretty neat town.
Yeah. Macon, Monroe, Covington, Palmetto.
A couple of great little college towns around there too, which I'm already forgetting the names of, but I used to know really well. Living in Georgia. But I mean, that's rough. That's, it's real life. It's hard lessons learned and everything else. But
well, Eleanor pointed out to me that we are in exactly the same circumstances we were in 2008.
Yeah.
We managed to hang on to our house.
Mm-hmm.
Everything else gone.
Mm-hmm.
But we're not in the circumstance of 2009.
Yeah.
We can come back. It was like, boy, that is some serious glasses half full kind of talk.
Well, good for her.
Yeah,
good for her. And then, it's funny. I always think about like what happened with Brian and my's experience, running our firm. And once in a while, I get the occasion to talk to younger architects, and I was like, we had a great time. We loved what we did, but there's also a really important cautionary tale there, which is, we did a lot of really stupid things from like a running the firm standpoint and from managing money and everything else, which, I take full responsibility for. But if you don't think about those things and take care of those things, the worm may turn in some way that you don't expect. And then,
we're not immune to the fallout from other people's mistakes.
Yeah.
It's like if a big firm in your market makes some bonehead plays, you could go out of business.
Yeah.
And you had nothing to do with their decisions.
Yeah.
So I think that we should really be sober. You don't design a building without getting a soils report.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, how big is the footing?
Mm-hmm.
Well, this is gumbo soil. It'll be a huge footing, you know. And if you don't build a huge footing, your building will fall over into the swamp.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And I think that we need to, you know, ground truth and understand the places where we're developing, the places that we're serving as design professionals.
Mm-hmm.
That there's a reality on the ground that you're only going to get a piece of the story from each of the 7 people you talk to.
Yeah.
And I think we're also prone to confirmation bias.
Yeah.
Where, I mean, you see this in RFPs, where people get the RFP, the request for proposal, and you read it. It's like, oh my God, as if they wrote it for us.
Mm-hmm.
They're saying they would like this project to be carried forward by vertebrates. Everyone in our firm is a vertebrate. And actually, they will give special, you know, consideration to firms that are comprised of mammals.
Yeah.
Everyone here is a mammal. This is going to be awesome. We're going to get this. You know, we see that, we project and we confirm that stuff. In reality, it's actually wired for Stantec or AECOM.
Right.
You know, and you never had a shot.
Yeah.
And you gotta spend money learning that lesson.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to get back and talk a little bit about just the general importance of incremental development, small scale development, especially for idealistic, reform-minded people like we know in our world. And, you know, I think as I go back and think about when I wrote that blog post and we were having all those discussions about needing to create new developers, I think.
Did you say 1,000 or 10,000?
I said 10,000, which was a lot of hubris, but that's okay. There was some math behind it. I did at one point.
But bracketing that, I thought, like, I'm going to use 1,000 and I'll look like the reasonable one.
Exactly. Yeah. I think it actually came down to, like, if there were 100 new small developers in the top 100 metros, you know, so that, but, you know, a lot of that came from the same experience you're talking about. We spent so many years in the 2000s as new urbanism gained a lot of steam and notoriety and success. I felt like we all very naturally got a little full of ourselves, and we started thinking, well, the solution now is to level up and convince the big Wall Street builders, convince Walmart.
We should take on more scale and complexity at the same time.
Yeah. And convince Walmart how to build urban Walmarts and convince CVS how to do everything right. And instead, we really, in retrospect, I guess you maybe only learn these things in retrospect, but in retrospect, we would have been so much more effective by just continually training a younger cohort of people to be the entrepreneurs to do those things. The people who actually were invested in the idea of doing urban places, period, and who cared about it, but helping them have the business skills and the development skills and the design skills.
Neighborhood organizing and political skills.
Right, exactly. To actually undertake and do projects instead of working through the large, you know, corporate apparatus.
I think we caught the patient's disease.
Yeah,
and we like to think we're better than that. And I think, you know, we recognize that we'll probably be doing, you know, if we take Stefanos' timeline notion of, like, it took 100 years to get here, it's going to take a couple of generations to get out of it. Mm-hmm. That's pretty salient advice. But if we can't, if we look to take on the tools by which conventional development is built, which has a lot to do with economies of scale and standardization. So we look for ways to do that. You know, it's like listen, Andreas at DPZ, you know, make the case for here's conventional development, here's traditional neighborhoods. Yeah. You know, we can, and Andreas's point is like, yeah, sprawl is in fact kind of ugly, but the main problem is it's really dysfunctional. It's not like our life is not enriched because we don't have enough beauty. Mm. Our life is torn down because we have a lot of mundane wastes of time and energy and mental health impacts. You know, it's dysfunction. Yeah. So if we're going to do this and we want to be able to use institutional money, if we want to get apartments at a reasonable number, we need to mimic it has to be at least 150 units model.
Yeah, and let's go back to like what Chris Lineberg used to always talk about with like there's the 19 standard product types.
Yeah. So but in the incremental development, we came forward with the idea that if you're going to be dealing with investors and banks and cities and everything else, we're not smart enough to keep more than one story straight, but you do have to know your audience and feed them what they eat.
Yeah.
You don't go to the bank and say, this is going to be a radically amazing new experiment. This just sounds like a lot of risk. It's like, well, this is not the be all end all, but it's a pretty good project. Reasonable debt service coverage ratio. It may not be a right fit for you. Maybe you want to refer me to another bank.
Yeah.
No, please come back. So, but the scale that we were taking stuff on at, that you could build a lifestyle center, and we would argue about whether or not it had enough apartments.
Yeah.
It's still a lifestyle center surrounded by a sea of parking.
Right.
So we created, I think, an appreciation for methadone, where we'd be the first to admit that the patient was not getting clean.
Mm-hmm.
But a junkie on methadone can hold down a job at a car wash. It's like they're moving in the right direction. And so good enough for now, room to fix it later. But I think that the fascination with and the necessity to be operating at that scale really damaged our understanding of what a sustainable business model would be.
Yeah, it's almost like, there were, Andreas has talked about this a lot, especially when we were doing all the work with lean urbanism, which was, there were all these incredible lessons from Seaside that we just forgot because Seaside became a famous, expensive resort town. But, the fact that, they curated small entrepreneurs to really be the people who made the energy for it. So, who brought in Modica and Charlie Modica and Modica's Market. And we had Perspicacity, which really created all the cute little stores that everybody liked. And we really forgot.
They didn't like pave asphalt roads. They did it 300 lineal feet at a time with people laying pavers.
Yeah. And that was the scale that, Robert Davis worked at that ultimately created this incredible place. And we just, I think it's probably just a natural human thing. We got so excited for the immediate possibilities. I think about it in terms like when we did New Longview together and as we started, working out the commercial portion of it. And ultimately, obviously one of the things there was start to talk about like, drugstores. There was a hole in the market for a drugstore. So it's like, okay, we're going to get a Walgreens or a CVS. And we knew that would be a battle to get them to do anything, better than like a C- building. So in retrospect, it's like, damn, I wish we would just had like an infrastructure put together, a human infrastructure to say, we're going to go find that young entrepreneur who actually knows the drugstore business. That's like a manager there.
The pharmacist who left Walgreens.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And, fund them to create the next thing and really be that in the community instead of trying to work on the corporate ones who don't really want to change anyway.
Yeah. Well, what was baked into the approach to incremental development from the beginning was the kind of a recognition that and this came out of the exploration of lean urbanism, because when we talked about, for people who weren't around at the time, that in between tactical and mainstream new urbanist projects, there would be the opportunity for a seam that was self-building and, people working in the parts of town that no one gave a shit about. That would be really cool. I got kind of panicked about that because I felt like we needed a really solid alternative business model for the people that were going to do that, because they're going to have to operate in the world of banks and lumber yards and the like.
Yeah.
They're going to have to find tenants. They're going to have to do all this stuff. And we shouldn't have an unnatural confidence that, a couple of white papers are going to get us there. So I went after that really hard. And that really led to our work with the Incremental Development Alliance, because it really, the large scale development outfits are dominated by the concept of economies of scale. And some of those economies of scale are completely necessary to amortize the level of brain damage you're going to encounter when you go to work in a new community that is roughly analogous but wildly different from the last
You know, so you're going to learn that the same words mean different things when you go 10 miles down the freeway.
Yeah.
So you need to have, and also, you know, if we're going to do 4 units, we may as well do 400.
Yeah.
Because the litigation will cost the same. You know.
So, and there's a lot of truth to that. I mean, we all experience that.
So that's the big stuff. And what we came up with was we need to conceive of this as a parallel system and a very different business model. And we need to cultivate folks that are very collaborative and recognize. I mean, the city of Memphis has 30,000 vacant properties. You're not going to run out of work.
Yeah. You're
not competing. This is more like craft brewing. You know,
yeah.
As long as you have the evil empire of, you know, Miller Coors and Budweiser, and Anheuser-Busch, it's like, okay, we're gonna do this radical thing. We're gonna make better beer. Okay, so we will expand the market.
Yeah,
and because it's better beer, we will take some of those assholes' market share. And you know, and the world is our oyster. And if you need to, you know, get my brewmaster 2 days a week, we can make that work. You're just getting started. Let me sell you some of our old equipment because now we're scaling up. Yeah. The level of collegiality and, you know, and they get together to trade association and lobby to get the rules changed in their state. That's a really good model. And I think that it applies, has a lot of utility for small developers and for the design professionals and the financial people that want to work with small developers. It is that build that network. And in Kansas City, I got to say, Abby is doing a great job of getting people together on a regular basis.
Yep.
And everyone comes and feels like they got way more out of it than they had to put in. Yeah. So they're going to keep coming back. And there's alcohol.
Yeah, well, that helps too. But yeah, she's done a phenomenal job, and I hope every community needs somebody like Abby to help be the ringleader. John, you're the master of the analogy, so I think that's a good place to wrap it with that. The analogy of the craft brewer. We've done a little over an hour, so I do like to ask people though, just for fun. You know, since I call this the Messy City Podcast, and it's about places that have that characteristic of small scale development, something that's a little more organic and, you know, not perfect. Do you have a favorite place in mind when we talk about that? A favorite, it could be a city, it could be a neighborhood. What comes to mind?
Well, I spent enough time in Ocean Springs with Bruce to, you know, he sees it warts and all because he's been grinding away there for over 2 decades, right? And I show up and it's like, that's awesome, that's awesome, that's awesome. You know, that could use a little work, but it's like the post-Katrina, that was high ground. So anybody with a bar or restaurant that got wiped out for Katrina found some space in Ocean Springs, and it had always been an artist colony and the like. So it's its own place.
Yeah.
And I like it a lot. And there's a lot of different scales and there's a lot of fine grain stuff, and then they have a quarter of craft.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I like that place a ton.
Yeah, it's a great town.
And but I also I have a real soft spot for Inman Park in Atlanta, which was a kind of a scruffy streetcar extension, and now is completely out of reach for somebody like me.
Yeah.
But great restaurants. I'm happy to experiment on the rich because they got room to make mistakes.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, those would be my 2 favorites. And I go back to my old neighborhood in Duluth, which has, you know, changed a lot over the years. I was part of the diaspora of, you know, like they went from 90,000 to 70,000 when the steel mill chain closed down, and there was a strike on the docks. But now it's back up to 90,000, and a lot of Minneapolitans have second homes there, which causes some tension culturally. So the Central Hillside in Duluth, Ocean Springs, Inman Park, you know, I think those are all great spots. Oh, and the Southeast Portland. It used to be the edge of that. It is a place with so much missing middle, with so many really creative, you know, solutions with the topography and everything. And it used to be 80% kind of
mixed and 20% just residential. And in the 59, they changed the zoning and flipped that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the kind of place where you can go there and people say, well, what do you mean you can't build a fourplex? They're everywhere. It's like, yeah, if that burned down, you could build a single family house. And it's like, no, that can't be. It's right there.
Right.
So it's a great place for precedent, but it's also a place where the locals don't really understand that you can't enhance or replicate it. You basically,
Right.
In some ways it's kind of hospice.
Yeah.
They're, as buildings turn over, the new ones getting built are not great. So that's a good case in point of like, it's not the great place, but it's a place where you could really understand the contrast between what was done well and what we're doing now.
Yeah. All right. Great. Thanks, John.
Yeah. Thank you.
Glad we could finally do this. We'll have to do it again.
Yeah. I'll see if I can learn some more hard lessons.
All right. Well, not too.
So farewell.